We can get started. So welcome everybody to the Short-Term Rental Advisory Committee. My name is Alex Vidal. I'm an analyst with the Department of Excise and Licenses. I'll be hosting the meeting. I just want to make sure everyone knows who's in attendance today. So we have Cindy Sestrich, we have Lorraine Woodward, who will be our guest speaker today, Alex Cobell from our staff, Councilwoman Amanda Sawyer, Dana Lubner, Daniel Cohen, our director, Erica Rogers, Kayla Greathouse, Councilman Flynn, Michael Murphy, Susan Bailey, and Tyler Woolsey. And Lisa Karen Welch notified me that she wasn't going to be able to attend today. She's going to be out of town. And Councilman Hines will try to join us a little bit later in the meeting. He had a conflicting meeting, but was very interested in joining us if he was able to get a chance. So see, we've got some attendees in the audience. Oh, Councilwoman C.D. Baca. So I will note that she is here and she's got her hand up. Erica, do I move her over to as a panelist?
I mean, if we've got time at the end for comments, we can definitely start with her. I think sometimes she lets us know she's here that way. So.
Oh, okay, excellent. Good to know. All right. And so today's August 9th. This is the second to last meeting of the year for the STRAC. And we'll talk about future meeting dates at the end. As usual, public comments are reserved for the end of the meeting. If you're in the participant section of the Zoom, you can raise your hand to notify us that you want to make a comment. You can also email me, and I'll check my email just before we close out the public comments. So we usually start with licensing and enforcement updates. And I just wanted to note for everybody that we've revamped our data slides here to make them easier to read and kind of sharing information that's just a little bit more applicable and useful for us. And so if you have any comments about the slides, about how we've changed them, if there's you have any notes or ways that we can improve them, please let us know. This is our first new slide. It shows new applications in blue and then renewal applications in orange. And before we had this as year to date, so from January until the month that we're in, but we've changed it to now be the last 12 months. So you can see what was happening roughly a year ago around the same time. We continue to see pretty steady numbers for both renewals and new applications. As we've discussed before, the market is coming back, and we'll see that in some of the other slides, particularly when we compare to previous years. This is our next new slide, which shows new license applications, but you can see for previous years. We may also change this one to be last 12 months. The way it's set up now is year to date, but you can see that in 2020, we had a pretty sharp decline in our numbers, and that continued into 21. The blue line here is this year, and you can see that around March, we finally started to get numbers above where we had been the last couple years. So that's a good sign. Hitting the same mark here in May, and roughly being on pace there with numbers that we saw in 2019. So more signs that the short-term rental market is rebounding. This slide shows renewal applications. Again, you can see previous years kind of tells the same story as the new applications. With the rising blue line here jumping above some of the prior years as we get into the summer of this year. Feel free to stop and ask questions at any point, but I'll just keep breezing by here. This is a new slide that shows the final disposition of applications for the last 12 months. So you can see the vast majority of applications we received were approved and issued. That was 92%, over 2,300 licenses that were issued. You can see about 1% get denied, 20 in total. And then about twice that, 2% were withdrawn by the applicant themselves. And then around 5% are administratively closed. And that's usually as a result of we requested additional information from the applicant and then they had about a year to provide that information. And if they don't provide it after a year, then the system automatically closes it. So This slide shows trends for our 311 system, so people can email and call us with questions. You can see that starting in 2019, we had a high number of interactions with the public related to administrative citations and notices of violation, and those have sharply dropped over the years. Pretty low number here, considering this is for the whole year of 2021. We only had 18 interactions related to those. And then applications and renewals, we saw a jump here in 2021 as folks were not sure what was happening with travel and the market changing, and had lots of questions about about their applications. And then this is just general questions and inquiries that we have as people had a big interest in the program as it kind of ramped up, and then over the years as people have gotten more familiar with how short-term rentals operate in the city, you can see a big drop there as well. And then the last number is property complaints, again starting with a larger number and then over the years dropping as our system of notifying the licensees when there's a property complaint. They then work with their neighbors to resolve those issues. That's been working very well, as you can see from the graph. This shows the same information, but it shows in just a different format. It's a pie graph here. So you can see the share of complaints was about 17% in 2020, and that dropped by 10% into 2021. And then slight rise this year, I think, as more people again start to renew their licenses and more STRs come back online. You start to get more of those interactions with neighbors that occur when you've got more short-term rentals. But the vast majority now are really just about their application. The majority of the questions we get now are about applications. This slide shows lodgers tax. You can see that this year, so far, we've collected $6.3 million worth of lodgers tax for just for short-term rentals. That represents about 10.3% of the total lodgers tax that the city takes in. And this graph we also revamped so that it's now last 12 months rather than year to date. So you can kind of see what was happening last year. We spoke to DOF about this number here in May, and they told us that there was a kind of a timing issue with folks making payments in June that was really for activity in May. And they said once you factor that in, this number would be closer to 1 million. And this would obviously drop a little bit. And so then the numbers would be more steady rather than a drop and then a rise. May is generally the busiest year, I've been told, for tourism in Colorado and Denver. And so that is just sort of a graph anomaly rather than an actual drop and a rise in lodgers tax. Talk a little bit about what's happening in the world of STRs. So locally, both Carbondale and Steamboat Springs have started to regulate short-term rentals in different ways. Carbondale is now issuing licenses for short-term rentals, and Steamboat Springs has restricted where short-term rentals can operate in the city. They're both also looking at taxing short-term rentals, imposing a special tax on short-term rentals that would go towards affordable housing. As I mentioned earlier, the tax that we impose on short-term rentals is lodgers tax. So it's a little bit different. And then nationally, we can see as the same story that we've been telling for a couple of years here is that the conversation is heating up all around the country, in this case, from Texas to Maine, as different states or cities look to regulate short-term rentals and wanting to harness the benefits, but also make sure that they're curbing some of the negative impacts as well. And then finally, we've been tracking this story also for about a year now, which is that the EU is considering adopting regulations that would apply to the entire EU, European Union. And this story is just about how the European Cities Alliance is pushing for that approach rather than having the approach that we have here, which is every state, every city kind of has their own, has the freedom really to adopt the regulations that fit their their community the best. But just a different approach, different way of looking at it, a different way of regulating the market. And so now I'll turn it over to Lorraine Woodward. She is from Becoming Rentable and is going to be presenting about disability access features in the short-term rental market. I see Councilman Flynn's got his hands up, so let me turn to him in case he's got a question.
Yeah, thank you. Just before you move on for the presentation, thank you for all the data on new applications and renewals. What is the, can we get a graph at, maybe at the next meeting, I don't need it right now, but that tracks the current level of all licenses? How many licenses do we have that are active right now? Do you know that offhand?
I don't have that number offhand. One of our staff might be able to pull it, one of the other staff members. One of the slides that we had before, we had it 2 meetings ago, was the compliance rate, and that shows the total number of active licenses, and then it compares it to the total number of unique listings, so we can get a gauge of what proportion of short-term rentals are complying and getting a license. We're going to be bringing that back in the next meeting.
Okay, would it be possible to do that with a breakdown by council district or by neighborhood? Any geographic geo-locating would be helpful.
We can certainly add that request. I think we'd have to go through GIS for that, but we can work on that for November.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for the good question. Any other questions while we're paused here? Okay, seeing none, let me stop sharing my screen and hand it over to Lorraine. Oh, it looks like Cindy has her hand up. Cindy?
I just had a quick one. I noted that you said you would bring back the compliance rate in November. The last quarter that we met, you said you were in the process of cleaning up all of the other, maybe it was double platform listings, and you said that your compliance rate looked like it was around 90% and it may be even better. Have you any update on that, or is that in November?
So I think what you're referring to is Brian Snow, our previous investigation supervisor, looked very closely at that data, and he's the one that actually created that slide. And he's the one that worked through getting rid of those double listings, because otherwise it would look like there are more listings than there actually are, but it's the same property being listed on multiple platforms. So he was able to kind of clean that up for that particular slide. We were definitely going to looking to recreate that same slide. We're just going to have to, Brian's is with a different department now, and so we'll have to recreate that slide in the same manner that he did. But we'll also be doing the same thing of making sure that there's not double listings on there as well.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you for the question. Just double check.
Sorry, one more before we get send it over to Lorraine. Sorry, Lorraine. We do have Councilman Flynn. We have 2,428 active short-term rental licenses in the city. So I wanted to get you that number. We can look at doing it by council district.
Thank you, Erica. That's interesting. If I recall correctly, around the time we were contemplating these regulations in this ordinance, former Councilwoman Sussman was sponsoring it. I think we had about 2,200 in the city. It's interesting. There's 2,400 now. I would have thought there'd be more, but okay.
There's been a range of about 2,200 to 2,700 at any given time over the last 5 years.
Consistently. So some drop off, some come in, etc. Great. Thank you for that.
Thank you for the questions. Great discussion. And seeing no other questions, take it away, Lorraine.
Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Hi, my name is Lorraine Woodward, and I am CEO and founder of Becoming Rentable. I was diagnosed at the age of 2 with muscular dystrophy and have 2 boys with muscular dystrophy. The idea of a vacation for me was going to the hospital for testing or treatment. And I wanted something different for my boys. But for our family of four, it was hard. Both of my boys have muscular dystrophy, and we wanted them to have a different vacation experience on my own, but we were not able to go on many vacations due to accessibility. So we ended up building a beach property with a rental unit. And this is how I started in the STR industry. We knew that by building this property that not only would we have a place to stay, but also we would have a place for others who needed an accessible property to stay. There is an extreme lack of accessible short-term rentals in the United States. In fact, there are over 70,000 searches each month for accessible short-term rentals. The problem is that less than 1% of these 1.3 million listings is actually accessible. The economic impact on people with disabilities is staggering at the tune of $645 billion. And 93% of the niche market of disability have a desire to travel. Currently, the major booking platforms do not understand the disability market. Currently, most of the platforms have two filters. Commonly, it is wheelchair accessible and elevator. But at Becoming Rentable, we expanded what we believe is important for what it means to have an accessible short-term rental. And our criteria is going beyond the wheelchair. And so we look at walker accessibility, autism, intellectual and developmental disability, vision, and hearing as well. Again, most of these platforms only have a elevator accessible checklist. But what we know that in finding an accessible short-term rental, it isn't a one-size-fits-all. What is accessible to me may not be accessible to somebody else. So how do we determine what is an accessible short-term rental? The fact of the matter is you and I can't. It's only the renter that can. And that's something that we feel strongly about. So in our efforts at Becoming Rentable, we ended up creating filters on our website to include 36 different filters. This allowing the renter to look at what their needs are and what makes a property accessible. So what I want to do right now is to just go over these different areas, and then I'll show examples as we continue. Because there's a lot of things in accessible short-term rentals that people may go, oh, I didn't know that that's important. And I always start at the outside of a property and the hard surface driveway. I use a wheelchair. I used to use a walker years ago. And as we're looking at these 6 areas of focus, we know that a hard surface driveway is important, particularly for people with wheelchairs and walkers. We also look at and consider the parking, and that is specific to wheelchair van access. In looking at our filters, we identify, do you have a ramp? Do you have a keyless door lock? Those are particularly helpful for people who don't have a lot of dexterity. I know for me, it's a lot easier. I can't grab a knob, and so it's easier for the hand to just put weight on the lever handles and to use my fingers for the locks instead of trying to get a key in. Zero threshold is probably the one area that people have a hard time grasping, and that's really a flat surface where a wheelchair can enter through a doorway. And I call it the bumpity bump. You know, is your threshold an inch or taller? And that is significant for people in manual wheelchairs, because sometimes it's hard to get yourself over that threshold. I know for me in my electric wheelchair, I sometimes have to go back a little bit and then give it a good, bump and to get in the door. So the zero threshold is actually a very important part of what makes up an accessible short-term rental. Door widths. ADA does identify that an accessible door width is 32 inches. At Becoming Rentable, we really don't look at 32 as the standard. ADA is 30 years old. We believe it's outdated. I know in my wheelchair, I can go through a 32-inch door, and you will know that I went through the 32-inch door because I'll leave skid marks on the side of the door. So for me, the 36-inch door is more palatable for access. As we go into the house, we look at, again, what are our door widths throughout the house? Are they 32? Are they 36? Are they more narrow? Again, the threshold, not only at the exit doors, but also in any of doors in the house, what is that threshold? We again look at our lever handles throughout the property, hard surface versus rugs and carpets. And some people may not. I want to do a social media posting that shows my wheelchair eating carpets, because I always say that my wheelchair is a wheelchair eating carpet machine, because it doesn't matter if it's a big carpet, a small rug, it eats it up. And so we really look at that. It's particularly hard for wheelchairs, but also somebody using a walker or that has some mobility issues in their legs as tripping hazards. Again, the elevator is a very known entity in accessible short-term rentals. Also a chair lift. Some people don't think about the chair lift, and also an electric lift in a living room area. A lot of my ALS folks sleep in a lift chair, and that is becoming more and more an important feature to have in an accessible property. In our bedrooms, we look at adjustable beds. A lot of times they're called hospital beds, but we're finding more and more in the mattress world, we're getting more and more towards the adjustable bed. What we also like to do is identify the height of the bed, and also how much space is underneath that, from the floor to the box springs or the mattress. Is it opened or not? If it's not, it doesn't allow a Hoyer lift to be able to transfer somebody from their chair. So that's something that we look at. A lot of these features that I am addressing really relate to universal design. The lower light switches, the lower closet rod. In fact, in my properties, we don't even have closet doors. They're open. It's easier to for our renters to access the closets. It aesthetically looks fine. It saves a little money. You don't have to have the closet doors. And then for the bedrooms, we look at a Hoyer lift. Hoyer lifts are also used for swimming pools as well, but we do specifically look at Hoyer lifts for the bedroom. In our kitchen, as we look at accessible short-term rentals, it's probably the area where we see the least amount of accessibility. There's not a lot of properties that have some of these features. And then there are elements of these features that you may go, oh, I didn't think of that, like a wheel under counter or kitchen table. The difference here is the height. For me, in my electric wheelchair, I can lift up so I can actually sit at a bar height table, but not everybody has that ability in their wheelchair. So we like to look at a traditional height table, but is there room to roll under so that you have knee clearance? a wheel under kitchen. I really do have this on Do Not Disturb, so I apologize, everybody. I don't know why my phone keeps ringing. So anyway, a raised dishwasher, a wheel under stove, access to ovens, and then we put in the kitchen area our elevated front-loading washer and dryer. And they're not always in the kitchen, but that seemed like the best place for us to put that. And then I would say the next area that is most important are our bathrooms. And that really is, as you're looking at properties, is it a roll-in shower or a step-in shower? That is very important for somebody in a wheelchair to know what you have in your rental. Grab bars in the shower, in the toilet area. Do you have a shower bench, a shower chair, a handheld shower? Is your sink one that you can wheel up to and under? Again, the lever handles for the faucets, and an accessible mirror. And an accessible mirror is really about the height. So what I wanted to do next is to look at where the industry is. And actually, I'm going to get there. But first, the benefits of an accessible short-term rental. And it's because of my renters that I started becoming rentable. We are hoping to change the way the short-term rental industry looks at and defines what it means to be accessible and why it's important. And these are just 4 examples for me. I love all my renters, but Gideon is a 16-year-old boy from Virginia. And I was sitting out in the driveway with my neighbors, and this family, got out of their van, and Gideon came up to me and he said, "Are you the owner?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "I first have to thank you for your wheel-in shower." He goes, "Do you know this is our first vacation that I can actually take a shower?" And I'm like, "Wow, Gideon, that's awesome." So later on in their trip, I went downstairs. I have the 3rd floors for our family. And so I said, "Gideon, how's it going? What do you like? Are you still loving the shower?" And he goes, "Yeah, but I like even more the microwave. And it's just on a rolling cart." And he goes, "Now I can microwave popcorn, and I don't have to ask my mom to do that." And then he said his 3rd favorite thing was the lower light switches, and also the lower thermostat. He said, "Now I can go turn on and off the light whenever I want to have the light off." And he said, "My mom and I battle all the time about the thermostat, and now I can reach and see the thermostat so I can change it to what I want." And so I just love that our property provided that for Gideon. And the access to the microwave is a no-cost solution. Lowering of the light switches and thermostat is something commonly you can do in construction, and you can also do it in renovation. My next family is really interesting. The husband had a stroke 2 years ago, and they have 2 small children, and they came to our rental property. They're from Ohio. And so I'm talking to them during their vacation, and I asked them, "Well, how is it going? What do you like?" And the response was really a surprise. Of course, they loved all the accessibility, but she said, "It's the first time since my husband's stroke that I feel that we're a normal family. We are able to go on a vacation, and everything that we need is here. There's nothing special that we have to bring in. There's nothing special that we have to order ahead of time." And this sense of normalcy gives me hope that when we go home, we can create an environment that offers that normalcy. The next story is one that, wow, was really harder than I thought. And this is the story of a young man who is 21, who had a disability starting at the age of 10 and had complications and was brought in hospice 6 months before they came on vacation. And before they went on vacation, the young man knew that his body was starting to shut down, and all he wanted was to go to the beach before he passed away. That's all he wanted. Well, immediately after that, he went into a coma. And for months, he was in a coma, and their parents would say, okay, we're 5 months out, we're 4 months out, and now they were a week out, 4 days out, 3 days out, and he wakes up. And they came to the beach, and mom, as you see in this photograph, gets her son underneath the arms, and they sit at the beach, and you can literally see, and in the photograph, he's smiling. When the water laps up to his chest, he's just free and happy, and it was just really magical. And to be able to offer this to that family, I mean, what a gift. And he passed away right after he went to the beach. But this property, I just feel really fortunate, and may others who have accessible properties also be enriched by these experiences. And my last family, and I have tons of families, we've had like almost 300 families now in 7 years come and spend time at our house, which I absolutely love. This last family is from Texas, and it was their first time to vacation in 28 years. The young man is now 38, is blind, has autism, an intellectual disability, and cerebral palsy. And when he was younger, mom and dad did what a lot of mom and dads do, hoisted him and carried him up steps and carried him in and out of the bedroom and the bathtub. And as he got older and bigger, mom and dad couldn't do that anymore. So for years, they kept looking for somewhere that they could take their family to a beach vacation. And they came to Carolina Beach last year, and are coming again this year. And so as people look at why should I make my house accessible, not only is, Carl Shepard in a Rent Responsibly Summit mentioned that the growth for the STR world, he believes in the next 5 years, is about the niche market. And we are that niche market of people with disabilities. And the benefit of having a property accessible just far exceeds, in my opinion, any amount of money that you can make. But besides the monetization of it, there is the human element, and which, as they say, is priceless. So now I wanted to look at to show you where the need is today. So I started with Airbnb, as we are today. They identified that in the United States, they have 660,000 listings. And Airbnb is different than VRBO in that they have a more comprehensive list of filters. They do have 13 filters. So of their 660 properties, we found that they had, as of today, 286 accessible properties. And that's less than 0.04% of their inventory is accessible. So when I identify that there's a great demand for accessible short-term rental properties, we can see by clicking on just one of the filters in their 660,000 properties, there are only 86 available accessible properties in the United States that can get through the front door. So then I looked at, all right, let's say the front door is not an issue and we don't care about that, but we need a step-in shower because Aunt Molly wants to come with us and she uses a walker and she can climb a step. So we did the roll-in shower, and we saw that Airbnb has 27 stays. So then we go and we look at bringing the two together of the entering the house and the shower, and you have 12 stays. So then we add one more filter to the 660,000 properties that Airbnb has online, and we look at only 2 properties on their list that is accessible. So where does that leave you all in Denver? Well, to my surprise, Denver is identified across the board as one of the top 10 wheelchair accessible cities in the country. So you have this incredible accolade of being accessible. The question for me is, where do people stay who are going to come to Denver that have a disability? So I took a look at that. And again, I went to both Airbnb and VRBO. And we found that, again, looking just in Denver and clicking on the one filter of entering the house with a 0 threshold, that in Denver you have 9 properties. You add that with a shower grab bar and you have 2 properties in Denver. And then I changed it up a little bit and said, all right, we're going to get into the house and we're going to be able to roll into the shower. You have no properties that are listed on Airbnb. On VRBO, again, I used their filters that they had, which are only 2, the wheelchair accessible and the elevator. And on VRBO's listing, it identifies 26 stays or 26 properties. The greatest challenge that we have with most of these platforms is validation, and that is that people may not understand what it means to be accessible. So somebody says, wait a minute, we have a 4-inch, threshold. They may not call it a step, that, and we have grab bars in our bathtub. We're accessible. And so they click on that filter. And so what happens is that people spend a lot of time going from property to property to look for these features. So again, as I'm doing some research in Denver, again, it's about education and awareness of what makes up an accessible property. So I went online to Becoming Rentable, where we have a couple of properties in Denver. And we find these properties, people, it's a free service. All of our properties are accessible for wheelchairs, walker, autism, vision, or hearing. And we post them so that people can find them. This property is listed, I believe, on VRBO. It is a great accessible property. The challenge with this property is it does not identify itself as an accessible property. So while VRBO and Airbnb both may identify very few properties, the fact of the matter is, through some education and awareness, that number could increase drastically. So this property, some of the features that I pulled out, it has the keyless entry in the garage. It has the a hard surface driveway, and inside the garage there's a ramp that allows you to get into the property. And it has a toggle switch for the light switch, and that is a very accessible, desirable component. I don't know the heights of the light switch or thermostat, but digitally that is also a very nice feature for the hearing impaired. It has a wonderful roll-in shower with a bench and grab bars. The bathroom also has grab bars. It's got a 0 threshold entry for the exterior, and a nice area out back for their guests to enjoy. But yet this property does not, it only mentions it has an elevator in the property. But if we were to certify this property, we would certify it as a wheelchair accessible property. And so again, we believe in what we do, that education is really the key to change the way the STR community identifies and looks at accessible short-term rentals. And how do we do that? Well, we want to validate, again, like this property, that what you have that's accessible is accurate, and that we validate it by photographs. We want to make sure you say you have a shower chair, that there is a shower chair or grab bars. We want to make sure that in your description that you have these features. Like I think the property I just showed you, you know, they have so many things that they could add to their description. And I've heard arguments back and forth, oh, nobody reads the descriptions, they just see the pictures. Well, for people with disabilities such as myself, we do read the descriptions, because a lot of times the information is not captured in an image, but it is reported in the description. And so we support having it in both places, and by having the accurate descriptions and the photographs are going to allow for more bookings, more tax revenue, and greater successes in the short-term rental industry in Denver. And photographs, it's really interesting. I always get the biggest giggles when I'm looking at photographs of how people take photographs. The first photograph on the left is a great photograph. It shows the accessible microwave. You can see over here that there's a curtain, and it looks like it could be a wheel under sink. There is another picture on this property that does show that it is a wheel under sink. And this is a property that shows an elevator. However, you might not know that that is an elevator by the photographs. And so in this property, it didn't say it was an elevator, it just had the picture, and we don't see what the threshold is like on the floor. So many photographs are taken from the waist up. And that's particularly important for people in wheelchairs. For example, this shower. You know, is it a step-in shower or is it a wheel-in shower? And so when you're taking photographs, to make sure that you do capture the from the floor to the ceiling in your photographs, so your renters can very easily identify, oh, there's a small threshold right here in the pan, but my wheelchair can go over it. Or we need to make sure Aunt Molly knows that her big toe doesn't stumble over that threshold. So they can see that in their research by identifying the photograph as well as having the information in the photograph. So, you know, our call for action is really looking at providing educational information for your STR community. Really looking at how people, if there are certain platforms that you all have in Colorado, particularly the small ones, what are their filters? And again, the more comprehensive filters, the more that somebody can identify what's going to meet their needs and have success. On Becoming Rentable, we do have a List My Property feature. So people can come in and go, wait a minute, we have an accessible property. And then we can go in, we have two people that go in, evaluate it, look at it, and then put it in our database, as well as we have a certification program that certifies a property is indeed what it says it is, as well as has the description. And a lot of times in our certification process, we highlight other features that make their properties accessible that people don't even think about. So hopefully this has given you an idea of what it means to have an accessible property in Denver and throughout the country.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. Really appreciate this. Is really great information. I want to thank you for really providing the committee this really important information. We've been talking about how education is really our strongest tool for making a difference here. And just want to say thank you for the work you're doing in the community and in the market. Are you prepared to take questions, Lorraine? Or...
Oh, absolutely. Bring them on.
Fantastic. Looks like Susan might have a question.
Okay.
Lorraine, your presentation was excellent. So thank you. And such a huge need, and one that we all recognize we need to do a much better job of serving. I'm just wondering about any partnership that Becoming Rentable might have been developing with the larger platforms. So you referenced Airbnb and VRBO,
Yes.
and both of them have initiatives underway. And much of it is education, which Alex referenced. And they're trying to train hosts not only to have a platform that's richer in terms of more filters, but actually educating hosts so that they note that their properties are accessible in the right categories when they are. Could you comment for all of us about anything you might be doing with them on a consulting basis? Because it seems to me that your level of expertise would hugely benefit them, where it's a stated initiative, but they're struggling on the implementation side.
Yes. So Airbnb reached out to me personally 2 years ago when they were on the cusp of looking at changing their filters. And because our rental property at the beach was on Airbnb at the time. And so we did a small piece with Airbnb on accessibility and being an accessible person with a disability hosting. And then about 3 months later, they came back and said, would you be willing to do an educational piece and teaming up with us and the Christopher Reeve Foundation? So we worked with them on that. I talked in depth with staff a half a dozen times about our recommended filters. They weren't at the time open to the degree of comprehension that we believe is needed, and identifying what it means to be accessible. I think in so many people's mind, it's this checklist. And again, it's not necessarily a checklist that somebody can say, I have A, B, C, and D, because everybody's needs are different. And because we have expanded our recommendation to go beyond a wheelchair. Up until this time, globally, the platforms have looked at wheelchair accessibility, and that's it. And we really believe and are trying to make an impact. We're having dialogue. I can't say that I'm being as successful as I want to be. Well, I can't say I'm not being successful as I want to be because they haven't said yes. But we really want the STR community to open up accessibility to go beyond a wheelchair. For example, I met with a team of investors last year who had a mountain resort community, and they said, Lorraine, did you go and look at our properties? And I said, yes, I did. And they said, did you see our accessible property? And I said, yes, I did. And was it accessible? I said, well, no, it wasn't, for what they identified wheelchair access. And they said, okay, we're done. And I'm like, well, why are we done? And it's like, because all of our properties are in a mountain community and they all have a flight of steps. And I indicated, well, for wheelchair access, there, are elevator lifts, there are external elevators, but there are also people with autism or vision and hearing can climb steps. But they have special needs as well. And at the end of that presentation, one of the investors says, okay, I'm now going to have an autism accessible property. And so we worked with them, and they have now an accessible autism friendly property. It cost them less than $500. We consulted with them. Their changes were absolutely minimal. And so that was very exciting to see. So with this broadness of accessibility also provides different levels of access. We know that sometimes in the area of wheelchair accessibility, some of the cost is very expensive, while there are other aspects of accessible STRs that aren't as expensive. But in relationship to Airbnb and VRBO, I have a non-disclosure. So specifics I can't address, but I can say I have been in dialogue and discussion with both of them. I have not with Vacasa and some of the other larger platforms, which I would love to do. So if anybody has suggestions or contacts, shoot me a message.
Lorraine, I know Councilwoman Sawyer and others want to ask questions, so I'll just make this last piece brief. I don't think, Erica, anyone's on from Airbnb. I did not hear that in Alex's run through. Is that the case today?
I think Aisha is still out
On leave.
but she should be back, I think, next week.
Yeah,
So,
I just was going to offer, Lorraine, maybe I can talk with you offline. As Erica knows, I serve on Airbnb's host advisory board, which is the board of 24 hosts from around the world. And there's very significant work going on in this area that's both public and then obviously non-disclosure oriented content. But in the public domain, they're making big improvements to the platform to have far more capabilities around the nuances that you took us through today. Not nearly as large a matrix, but more categories and more specific feature elements. And I think there's a real opportunity because they're adding resources in this area and view accessibility as critically important, even so much so that host loans and things like that to make investments in their properties. So I think we can make a difference in Denver and anywhere else in the world for that matter.
That's great. That's what it's interesting. We built a model property. We just finished. It's called the Little Yellow House. It's in Conway, Arkansas. And it's my hometown. I haven't been there in 30 years because there's no place for my boys and I to stay that's accessible. It is a property that is wheelchair, walker, autism, IDD, vision, and hearing. And our hope is that we can have more of these properties as an example for the community, working with colleges and universities and making it an educational tool. So anyway, we have a lot of exciting things going on. And Susan, I would love to talk to you offline.
Great. Thank you so much.
Be sure to get Lorraine's contact information and share that as appropriate. And just want to note that Councilman Hines has joined us. So thank you so much for joining us, Councilman. And then I believe Councilwoman Sawyer had a question.
Thanks all, and thanks Lorraine. This is an absolutely fantastic presentation and got me thinking, wondering whether Excise and License has, based on this information, considered the potential of, creating some sort of, I don't know what I'm thinking of here, like a funding stream of some sort of program that, potential hosts or current short-term rental hosts who are licensed in the city and county of Denver could access to actually make some of these improvements. And I don't know, Lorraine, if you have maybe like a checklist available for, obviously, as you mentioned earlier in your comments, something like a wheelchair accessibility would be a much more expensive set of fixes than perhaps an autism accessible unit or something like that. But, if you have any checklists or something like that, where, our hosts could take a look at those checklists and then maybe, we could consider setting up a funding stream or grant program of some sort to help our hosts pay for those kinds of upgrades to their unit, then that would, make it, we of course wouldn't be able to check all the boxes with every property, but certainly offer at least some of the more properties to be accessible for some of these needs. So just, I guess that's two questions, one for kind of the excise and license side and one for Lorraine. But, just really got me thinking, I think it would be a great opportunity.
There are many great opportunities, I think, in what we're doing. And I would love for you all to get involved with this educational effort, because that's the only way we're going to see the change that we want in expanding what it means to be accessible. And we do have a lot of educational materials that I'll talk to Erica about and see about, how we can work together and getting that information to the Denver community.
I'll jump in here with a couple of tidbits. So we actually found Lorraine through the Rent Responsibly group that Dana, our STRAC member Dana Lubner runs. And she gave an awesome presentation at the Rent Responsibly Summit to a bunch of hosts in Colorado. So we're super excited. We saw the presentation and we knew we had to have her here at STRAC. And we have looked at the checklist that's on your website, but we're happy to continue collaborating. I will actually turn it over to Councilman Hines because this was something that he approached us about, I believe, 6 months or so ago. And we're excited to announce that we'll be collecting data probably starting in the new year, just with the technology changes that are taking place, but we'll be collecting information on short-term rental applications about what types of accessibility features the short-term rental has. So this will be on new, this will be on renewal. People will just, check the ones that they have. It won't be used against them in any way if they don't have any, right? It'll be just kind of collecting that information so that after a year we can take a look and say, here's what we've got in Denver. What kinds of policy changes can we pursue to encourage adoption of more accessible features? What do we have the most of? What do we have the least of? And make some informed decisions based on that data. So Councilman Hines, I don't know if you want to add to that, that announcement and kind of give some background.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. My name is Chris Hines. I serve on Denver City Council representing District 10. Lorraine, wonderful presentation. And in case people don't know, I'm the first elected official in Denver's history who uses a wheelchair for mobility. So when I was elected, the city council chambers weren't wheelchair accessible. The restrooms in City Hall weren't wheelchair accessible. And we're still making modifications to City Hall. And in addition to a whole bunch of other, areas around the city and beyond. But I want to thank Excise and Licenses because I probably wasn't the kindest when I first mentioned the point about we should make sure that accessibility is a thing because a lot of people know the Americans with Disabilities Act. It was passed 32 years ago, but anything that was created after ADA was passed, rightfully so, we don't make legislation. We don't make laws for things that don't exist. And so all of the new platforms and technologies for for getting around our city, like taxis or hotels, all of those are covered by ADA. But the gig economy, so Uber, Lyft, Bird, Lime, Airbnb, VRBO, none of them have any regulations regarding requirements for access for people with disabilities. Short-term rentals are even more important or even more difficult because we're talking a lot of times about people's private homes, or at least that's where the original concept started. And even ADA is explicitly silent about people's homes. How intrusive should government be? I don't know. I think they should stay out of my home in a lot of ways. So, but I was concerned that we were cannibalizing an industry, the hotel industry, that has regulations for people with disability, and in return replacing it with something that had no regulations. And to Lorraine's presentation, to her point, I read everything, even when I'm going on a hotel website. The last hotel I stayed at, I called them multiple times because I wasn't sure exactly what I needed to bring. And at this point, I have a bath bench, a thing that is $1,000. It's an extra carry-on. I bring it everywhere. Even if they say they have a bench, I bring it because I don't know what they have. Hotel doesn't have photos of all the equipment. So what Lorraine has presented, I think, is even better than the hotel industry. So, I see, like, when I first started talking with Excise and Licenses, I was saying, I'm not going to use, I've tried, I've never actually been able to to find anything that would work for me, a person with a disability, on any of the short-term rental sites. If the stuff that Lorraine is talking about becomes becomes the case, then I would probably stop using hotels and would start exclusively using a short-term rental application. So because it provides me the information I need to know what to bring in advance. So Erica had mentioned the data collection. So now that Lorraine has given me this knowledge, I want to ask for more, but I didn't know until today. And so what I asked Excise and Licenses for was just to collect some information. What does our short-term rental stock have in Denver? We require licenses for every short-term rental. Why not just see what we have? Do we have 0% accessible units? We have 100%. I think it's probably closer to 0% than 100%, but I don't know. And I think just before we start making legislation, and that's what we in the legislative branch do, let's get some data. And so I'm really thankful that Excise and Licenses, Erica specifically, and Alex have been willing to do that. And I also want to compliment you, Excise and Licenses, for being intentional about moving forward, about including the disability committee. So thank you, Erica. I searched through the disability committee. I asked several different groups if they would be willing to join STRAC. I didn't get a response from any of them, which is on me, not on you, but you continue to do the research, and you found, Lorraine, you found a way to incorporate the data and analytics. So thank you for that. Is there anything else I can anything else I should provide?
No, thanks for being here, and thanks to you both for providing your perspective. I think, I learned a lot, especially about the pictures and things I just never would have thought of myself. And so that perspective is always, just super appreciated, and we really appreciate you sharing.
You're more than welcome.
I'm sorry, I have one other thing. So I'm going to Texas next week. I'm from Texas. I'm going back to the small town in East Texas where I live, where my mom is still in the same house where I was in high school. It's not wheelchair accessible. It was built in the 1920s. So I'm staying in a hotel in Nacogdoches, and my mom and I are going back and forth right now to determine whether the room is accessible. And my mom, she knows me, right? I mean, she's known me since I was born. Obviously, she doesn't know the specific requirements that I have as living now with an acquired disability of a spinal cord injury. But it is something, even we're still what about the mattress height? Do we have to pull out, the mattress, the box spring, so that the mattress is a height that I can reach? So even going home to where I was born, I'm still having to do a lot of the research and data collection in advance. Whereas with what Lorraine had proposed, the photos are right there. It is not just of a room; it is of that room. So it's pretty exciting.
Chris, we have over 800 properties on our map, and we have a lot in Texas. So I encourage you to go to becomingrentable.com. And for giggles and grins, see if you can find an accessible property near your hometown. We've had great success in Texas with identifying and finding accessible properties.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, it looks like Cindy had a question.
I do. Again, Lorraine, great presentation. I learned a lot. Where would I go to find that information that you had on your presentation there? Does your website have the presentation and the facts that you showed?
No, but I think Erica, we're recording it so that she will have it. The research I just did today in Denver and looking up, just going online and keying in the filters, and so I just did that today. But the presentation, I believe, will be made available on the town's YouTube channel, so you can go there and check it out, I guess in about 10 days or 2 weeks.
Is there anything I have that's downloadable?
Cindy, we can get you probably the slide deck.
Yeah, I can get you the slide deck. I'm happy to send that to
That'd
you.
be great. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Excellent conversation. Really happy to see folks learning. We've learned so much. I really appreciate Councilman Hines working with us and getting us to think outside the box. We've met with Councilman Hines and gotten his input. We've also met with the Office of Disability Rights, the Office on Aging, the Atlantis community, which is a nonprofit that worked with folks on accessibility in their homes. And so we've really been learning a lot about this issue and hoping to translate that into education for the community and efforts that will bear fruit in the community as well. So really happy to see this conversation. Councilwoman Suri, I know you had a question earlier. Just curious if you have another question or if you just got your hand.
No, sorry, I forgot to
No
take down my
problem.
hand. Yep.
No worries.
Thanks.
Just wanted to make sure. All right, so that concludes our discussion, our main topic discussion here today. I'm going to put the last screen up, which is just our public comment slide. And very quickly see if we have any folks, any attendees that would like to provide a comment. I just want to remind folks that the public comments are limited to 2 minutes per speaker, and we generally will take input and feedback for the committee to consider, but we don't generally take questions from the public for the committee to answer. And so I just wanted to remind folks of that. And I'm not sure if Alex or Matt had their hand up first, but we'll go in alphabetical here and go with Alex. Alex, can you hear us? Alex Dodd. You could unmute yourself.
About that, I had a little technical difficulty there.
No problem. Go ahead.
Thanks so much for the time. And Lorraine, thank you so much for the presentation and joining us on the call today. That was very informative. I was curious, and I imagine this is probably like a link to further resources, but so my mom is disabled and she's been getting assistance for modifications in her own home because she has a home business through the Department of Vocational Rehab. I was wondering if there's similar resources available for funding. I know another commenter mentioned something about putting together a fund among us as a host community, but I was wondering if there's any like existing grant programs or funding that might be some quick wins that I might be able to, you know, position to clients or other property owners to be able to be making some of these modifications to their home for accessibility purposes.
Thank you for that, Alex. So I'm not sure if anybody will be able to provide an answer to your question. As I mentioned, generally we don't answer questions, but your question is an interesting one and something that we will probably be looking at. Should we go down this path of looking at potential funding for modifications in folks' homes? And so as part of that, we would naturally look at if there are existing funding sources that we could connect folks with. Right now, I'm not sure if anybody has an answer, but if Lorraine or anybody else is aware and would like to provide an answer, I think that would be appropriate.
I'll address that. There is a tax credit of $5,000 for accommodations for short-term rentals. So there is a tax benefit. I have not found or identified any resource of grant funding as of yet.
Thank you for that.
Okay.
Very helpful.
Yeah, any further info you have would be definitely be appreciated. I'm sure we'll be in touch further, Lorraine, as well.
Okay.
Really glad that we found you. Thank you.
Thank you for your input, Alex. And then we have Matt Carnes as well. Let me see if I can allow Matt to unmute himself. Matt, can you hear us? Matt, are you able to unmute yourself? Don't think Matt's going to be able to connect with us today. Matt, if you can hear us, feel free to shoot us an email. My email is there on the screen. Feel free to provide us input that way, and we can take your input and provide it to the committee for further consideration. All right, well, that concludes our committee meeting for this evening. Actually, there's one more slide, and that's about future meetings. So normally we meet every quarter on the second Tuesday of the month. The next meeting would have fallen on Election Day, the second Tuesday of November. And so, Erica, I'm not sure, did you want to ask the committee about their preference for the meeting?
Yeah. Yeah, if people have a preference for November 1st or 15th, I know 15th is getting into the holiday season, so we're probably leaning towards the 1st. If anyone has any major conflicts or input, just email us and let us know. But those are the 2 dates we're looking at.
And Cindy and Susan, did you have questions or have input on the date of the next meeting? Oh, well, I would start with Cindy here, so we don't have.
Okay. I have a question, not about the next meeting.
Okay, sure, go ahead.
Okay. The letter that you sent to us, Alex, it mentioned both short-term rentals and then 30-day rentals. And my question was, since it's going to be coming up in, I think, 2023-24, that everyone in the city who has a rental is going to have a license, and it's being licensed through your department also. Would the short-term rental people who have a short-term rental license, but they do some 30-day plus renting, would they need both licenses?
I can answer that, Cindy. So I think you might be referring to possibly a bulletin that went out from excise and licenses around this, or maybe it was an email. But yes, the answer to your question is yes. If at any point you rent your property for 30 days or more, you'll need a long-term rental license. If at any point you rent your property for less than 30 days, you'll need a short-term rental license. And if you're going to be going back and forth, you'll need both.
Okay, great. And with the long-term rental license, I understand you have to have certain needs or certain, what am I trying to say? The property has to be inspected, and you have to send in that inspection report that it's been checked off and everything's great.
Yes, so don't want to get too far into the weeds on the long-term rental program, but yes, it does require an inspection, and happy to provide information for folks that are seeking to get a long-term rental license.
Okay, but are you planning anything for short-term rental like that? Or are you going to continue on the same program that we have so far?
I see. I'm not currently, excise is not currently having any discussions about having an inspection component to short-term rentals. Council passed the program, and it's kind of enshrined in ordinance, and so any changes would require an ordinance change. And so if council were interested in something like that, or if the committee wanted to promote something like that for us to consider, we would. But at this point, there are not any ongoing discussions about having inspections for short-term rentals.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for the question. And Susan, did you also have a question?
I do. And it's really more, Alex, aimed at maybe you and Erica in the next agenda. So if our session is on November 1st, Erica, I think there's a lot of members of the short-term rental community at all levels that are very interested continue to be interested in the ADU topic and the task force that Abe and team Josh have underway. And so I think it would be a great topic for a readout. And given we have 3 members of council with us, there continue to be announcements of new neighborhoods added, additional ADU overlays. And I think the more that we can keep people educated and understand how that's progressing would be great. So I don't know, Erica, how things are looking for the topics at the next meeting, but I would just suggest that maybe it's an opportune time to do a session update in some way on that topic.
Gotcha. I can provide one update that I wanted to give before we hop off. And this will be about, we talked about adding questions to collect data about accessibility features at short-term rentals. Those, once we finalize those with Councilman Hines' office and the other groups, those will probably go live in the spring because we have a technology freeze coming up where they're upgrading our software. But one thing that you'll see probably in the next 6 weeks or so on the topic of ADUs is some additional questions that, again, are not meant to, they're not going to come into play as far as affecting your renewal or application. They're going to be more data collection about accessory dwelling units or identifying the space that you're renting. For some background, we had received some feedback from hosts earlier this spring that, the filters that Airbnb or the other platforms use to be able to advertise the type of space that you're offering weren't really super inclusive to describe all of the options, right? They're more geared toward marketing your space as private versus shared, and didn't give a great idea on whether they were an attached or detached structure, whether either of those places were an official accessory dwelling unit or, some other classification. And so I know we had some folks who got caught up in, just a renewal process in trying to square away what they were able to put on their Airbnb advertisement with the space they were actually offering. And so to find a solution that didn't involve, zoning reports and things like that, we're just adding those questions to the application so people can self-identify, hey, I've got a basement space, it's private, but it is in my home. Or, hey, I've got a detached space. I don't know if it's an ADU or not under the zoning code, but here's how it's described. And hopefully that will cut down on the amount of time it takes to kind of investigate those. We can see, here's the type of space it is. Here's what they've posted that squares up, and we can push it through the system rather than, sending those to zoning because we've had some issues with that. So that's a small update on the ADU front to hopefully address some of the snags in the process that we've heard of. Like I said, those should be live in the next maybe 6 weeks or so. So people will start seeing those on their renewal applications and their new applications as well.
Thanks, Erica.
Mm-hmm.
And to that point, we're always looking for topics of interest to the committee. So please, if you want to share now or if you want to email us later, we're always interested in that. We'll definitely look at bringing back ADUs and as well as continuing this conversation on accessibility. And so if there are other topics the committee is interested, please let us know. And Erica, unless you had any final closing comments, I think we can adjourn.
Nothing else for me.
Alrighty. Well, thank you so much to everybody for attending and for contributing to the conversation. I know I learned a lot. Hopefully you're learning from this as well. And I'm looking forward to your continued input. And we'll be sending out a save the date meeting invite as soon as we settle on a date for the next meeting. And hope to see you all then. And if to hear from you in the meantime. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.